Chapter 44. That night after dinner, I stole away to bed to examine the passports we had received from Hanoi. Each permit consisted of a 4-inch by 12-inch sheet folded into 4 sections, as thin and fragile as an ordinary piece of paper. The front page was white and stamped with the Vietnamese national symbol, a circle of red on a flag with a yellow star in the middle and bordered with long grains of ripened rice. At the bottom of the image, the golden rice strands were tied together in a red ribbon, and the phrase Socialist Republic of Vietnam was printed across its surface. Underneath, it said Laissez-Passer number 40783 ATHI. Inside was my picture looking straight at the camera, along with the space for my signature. The rest of the passport was dyed a pale green color and covered with red stamps, most of them dated May 30th, 1984. Most exciting was a line that read, "The bearer of this ID is permitted to leave the Socialist Republic of Vietnam before May 30th, 1985 to final destination, United States of America." I repeated the line over and over again, trying to absorb its meaning. Outside, my mother's voice called me to help with the dishes. I folded the passports away, got up, stretched, and walked out. The roofless kitchen had almost dried of the earlier rain. Still, puddles of stagnant water lay here and there on the floor, reflecting their iridescent cloudless sky. My mother stood in the dark, watching my aunt's house, waiting. The chilly air howled through the empty dining hall, playing with her thin clothes. My footsteps startled her. "Shh." She put a finger to her lips, signaling for me to be quiet, and whispered, "Don't make a sound. I am waiting for her." I halted in my tracks. The whooshing sound of the water in the bathroom vibrated through the long hallway. Soon after, I heard the opening and closing of the door, and then the familiar clapping of my aunt's clogs echoed closer. She emerged into the frail glow of the kitchen's light, her hands at the side of her pants, tying the waist strings. My mother cleared her throat. "Hello, sister," she said. She looked up with a gasp. "Oh, hello." In the shadow of the corridor, her eyes formed 2 large spots on her face that made her look like a raccoon. "I didn't see you standing there. You scared me half to death." "I am sorry. You must have heard about the news. Our passports came today." "Yes, I did," my aunt replied, fixing her clothes. "Congratulations." "Thank you. There is something I want to discuss with you. I am thinking about selling my house and moving to Saigon. We are leaving soon for America, and I want to raise some cash to pursue this." My aunt interrupted her. "Wait, don't tell me this now. We need to discuss it with my husband." "Why?" "It's my house and I'm going to sell it. I just want you to know about my plan since you are my sister. I don't need to check with your husband." My aunt yawned loudly. "I think you should. I'll see you tomorrow morning." "Okay," my mother said, nodding. "If you insist. What time?" She turned away from us. 9 o'clock, my living room. The next morning, my mother woke up early, even though she didn't have to prepare for the market. In the kitchen, she sat quietly on a small stool, boiling a pot of water to make ginger tea for my grandfather. I lay in bed, awakened by the frosty breeze that gusted through the big gap in the wall where my window used to be. The rough rice sacks felt prickly against my skin. I reached in between their layers for the hidden passports and read the fine print once more, wondering whether we would actually leave Vietnam by the deadline of May 30th, 1985. Jamie got up from his bed. He walked noisily outside into the kitchen, scratching his head. My mother handed him a cup of water and a toothbrush packed with a mixture of salt and baking soda. He brushed his teeth and spat out the excess liquid into the garden through a hole in the wall. Outside, the neighborhood came to life. Houses rang with voices. Cocks crowed, doors squeaked open and closed, and children recited their poems one last time before school. Everything seemed clean and bright after the rain, and the smell of wet soil filled the air. The grandfather clock in my aunt's house struck 9 times, resonating through the garden. My mother wore a silk blouse that was so blue it was almost black, with tiny faded gardenia flowers printed on it, and a pair of black nylon pants. They were the only decent garments she had left, and they were reserved solely for important occasions. Her hair was pulled back into a simple bun, her body was stiff, and her eyes stared straight ahead, hard and chilly. She took a deep breath and walked out of the kitchen, heading past the garden. Jimmy and I waited by the window. We watched her disappear behind the tall column covered with thick patches of green moss that led to my aunt's house. No more than 2 seconds later, she pushed their door open and stormed out angrily. She raised her fists above her head in frustration as she screamed out, "Daddy, where are you?" My grandfather poked his head out of his room with a look of bewilderment on his face. His tangled hair stuck out from his head like porcupine quills. "What is going on?" he asked. My mother stomped through the kitchen door. She kicked the stool out of her way and yelled, "Daddy, there is something I need you to settle for us. Would you please come with me?" She turned to my brother and me and ordered us in the same voice, "You two, get dressed and follow me." Before we could finish putting on our clothes, my mother grabbed Jimmy and me and strode back to my aunt's living room. My grandfather followed us a few steps behind. Waiting for us at the coffee table, my uncle sat with his back to the Buddha's altar. His arms were folded against his chest. Through his thick glasses, his eyes glared at us with a look that spelled trouble. Behind him, like a platoon of soldiers ready for combat, his 8 sons stood still, echoing their father's unyielding expression. On the small section of the wall behind the Buddha hung Moonlight's picture, mounted neatly in a black frame, and next to it my grandmother's. Clouds of incense from the altar permeated the tense atmosphere. In the electric silence, we could hear the relentless ticking of the clock. My mother raised her voice, addressing no one in particular. "Where's that awful sister of mine?" My uncle replied, using the same tactic to counterattack. "My wife can't attend the meeting. Something came up unexpectedly." "What can possibly be more important than this? Is she afraid to face me?" "My wife is not important in this matter," my uncle said. "You made us meet you here for a reason. Why don't you just say what you need to say and leave?" My grandfather spoke up. "Aren't you going to invite us to sit down?" "Forgive us," he said. Turning to Lay, his oldest son, my uncle ordered, "Pull out a chair for your grandfather." Lay moved out of his rank like a robot, but my mother waved her hands to stop him. "Forget the phony formality," she said. "This is only going to take a minute. I want you all to know that I'm planning to sell my house." "I am sorry," my uncle said, "but you can't do that." My mother raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "It's my house, isn't it? I hold the title deed." My uncle turned to his oldest son and signaled to him with his eyes. Lay opened a small door behind the Buddha's altar and pulled out a stack of papers, giving it to his father. "Well?" my mother prodded him. "Miss Kuhan," my uncle began, turning the pages before him, "you are right about the ownership of your house. However, you can't sell your property because I am owner of the land that your house is standing on. It is documented in here. When you calm down, you may examine the papers if you don't believe me." Anger darkened my mother's face. "I bought that land from you years ago," she said. "Your first son just turned 15 years old the day you brought him to my mansion. I remember giving him his first bicycle, and I gave you the money to pay for the estate and the renovation. My parents and your son witnessed the deal between us. How dare you change the story now? Besides, I practically bought this entire compound for the price that I've paid you through the years." My grandfather nodded pensively. "I'm not senile yet. I remember the day clearly. Do you remember, Lay?" Lay avoided my grandfather's stare. My mother drew a hand to her chest in her struggle for composure. Then she said to my uncle, "What am I supposed to do now? I need to raise money for our trip. Do you have any suggestion as to what we should do?" My uncle pounded his fist on the glass surface of his coffee table, enunciating each word as though he were talking to a stubborn 5-year-old child. "I don't care what you do. You are not selling my land. That is my final answer." He slammed the file shut, making a loud snap with his hand. Silence returned to the room. Finally, my mother tossed her hair out of her face. "Very well, you thief. In fact, you are all thieves. If I can't sell my house, I'm going to break it apart brick by brick. You will never get that house, not while I'm alive. This is not over yet." She stormed out, beckoning with her hand for Jimmy and me to follow. My cousin's laughter chased us through the garden. 5 minutes later, Tin showed up at the entrance of our kitchen. The sun peeked through the openings of my bedroom wall, shining on his pimpled face. His crossed eyes blinked apprehensively. My mother walked out of her room and snapped at him. "What do you want now?" Tin stammered. "I am here to take back the rice sacks. My father needs them for storage." "Take my bed away," Jimmy protested. "Where will we sleep?" "Don't argue, Jimmy," my mother said. She turned to Tin and said in a hoarse voice, "Take them away. Get those godforsaken things out of my house." "Mommy, the cement is cold," Betty cried. My mother held her face in her hands, sobbing. "Then get some newspapers, lots of them. We don't need those stinking rice sacks."